Hi, Jay. This is Mara from Pittsburgh, although I'm actually calling from New Mexico right now. And I wanted to call in a response to the different calls about veganism, vegetarianism, and meat eating. Um, Look, as you rightly point out, Jay, much of the problem in this debate is that each side acts very arrogantly when they say that the other side is ignoring some fact that is obviously true. For example, the person who said he didn't like citizen radio because the host refused to admit the obvious fact that there's an ethical way to eat meat. And then the person on a recent podcast who said it was obviously true that killing a sentient being is wrong. The reason that there's a debate here at all is that none of these things are, in fact, obviously true. So first, I want to say that I strongly disagree, with moral relativism, which is expressed by some of your callers. I don't think that what is right or wrong morally depends on what society does or does not condone. There are, of course, different societal conventions across the world for lots of things, but this doesn't mean that actual morality is subject to individual tastes or the tastes of their communities. So I want to start with the argument for vegetarianism. The core of this argument is usually that it is wrong to kill a sentient being, period, full stop. Then the arguer points out that many animals that we eat are sentient, like cows and pigs. Generally, the definition of a sentient being is not well articulated, but it mostly seems that a sentient being has some intelligence, has the ability to feel pain, has self-awareness, and or is other regarding. This is also the reason why many vegetarians think it's okay to eat fish and seafood because they don't seem to be sentient. So far, so good. But opponents are often, albeit inarticulately, questioning the core of the argument. Why is it wrong to kill a sentient being? Why is it wrong to kill a being with feelings? Some vegetarians just say that it's a basic fact that is obvious, but it's that response that causes the impasse. There may be answers to this question, though, as one caller alluded to. We don't kill babies or the handicapped or the elderly for sport or food. And I take it that the implicit assumption made by the caller is that we don't do things because babies, the handicapped, and elderly are sentient beings. But that may not be true. Many people would say that we don't kill these beings because they are human, and we share a special bond with them because of that fact. So while sentience may be integral to humanness, it is not the sole reason humans are special. Another response to saying it's wrong to kill a sentient being is that sentience doesn't have anything to do with it in another way. Morality is a human invention. It is humans that have moral rights and moral obligations, and humans alone that can make moral judgments. For example, we do not think it is wrong for a cheetah to kill a gazelle for food. We do not think the gazelle is morally superior to the cheetah because it eats plants and the cheetah eats meat. We think that it is wrong for a person to kill another person, but we don't think it's morally wrong if a bear kills a person. It may be an awful tragedy, but the bear did not do anything ethically wrong. Thus, the argument goes, morality is for people. We may think that the fact that we have morality means we have at least some obligations to non-human animals. So, for example, we may have the obligation not to be cruel to animals that can feel pain, but this may not be because they are sentient. Some argue that we ought not be cruel to animals because it will have the effect of making us cruel to each other. So our obligation towards animals is just piggybacks on our obligations towards other people. But some people have argued that privileging humans above others just because they are human is a kind of speciesism. We have discovered over the last few centuries that it is wrong to privilege white people over black people simply because they are white. This is racism. And it's wrong to privilege men over women just because they are men. This is sexism. Race and sex, while they make all kinds of practical differences in specific cases, do not make any moral difference in deciding who gets equal consideration. Similarly, some extend the analogy to say that while the difference between human and non-human may make significant differences in all kinds of situations, it does not make any moral difference in deciding who gets equal consideration. That is, if babies get moral consideration that exempts them from being killed for food or sport, then animals should get this exemption too. Anything else is just saying that might makes right, and that we are morally allowed to kill animals for food and sport just because we can. What does make the moral difference, then, between what we can kill and what we can't? Some say that there is no dividing line. It depends on particular attributes that a being has, and so sentience would not be the answer. You could, after all, be a utilitarian about it and say that in each case it depends on the calculation of minimizing pain and maximizing pleasure. So, for example, vegetarians may not think it was wrong for our ancestors to eat meat because their only other option was starvation. One animal may be able to feed many people, so the overall calculation comes out positive. Vegetarians may think that it is wrong to eat veal because the pain and suffering inflicted on a veal calf while it's being raised outweighs the pleasure that people get from eating tender pink meat. Thus, eating veal is wrong, but not directly because a veal calf is a sentient animal, but because a veal calf can experience pain and suffering, and we have an obligation to minimize that wherever possible. And many vegetarians do have a kind of propensity to be utilitarians about the situation, even though utilitarianism would condone meat eating under certain circumstances. This is borne out when vegetarians make arguments about animal cruelty on factory farms, hunting for sport or animal testing of beauty products. It is also borne out in the argument that we could feed many more people on the planet if we did not waste so much food raising cows and pigs for their meat. For example, the same amount of grain can produce a pound of meat or 10 pounds of grain-based food. So it is wrong to use that grain to produce meat because it would produce so much more food. This is basically a utilitarian argument that the amount of pleasure that some number of people get from eating meat is outweighed by the amount of pain and suffering experienced by starving people around the world. But of course, the question that needs to be asked is, why should I be a utilitarian about meat eating? After all, strict utilitarianism can lead to a tyranny of the majority. Thus, in our own political system, while we operate like utilitarians about many things, majority vote wins, for example, we all have rights that cannot be violated, even if the violation would lead to the greatest good for the greatest number. So let's take stock. All right, we have basically two reasons for not eating meat. It is wrong to kill sentient beings for food or sport, and it is wrong to eat animals if the pain and suffering, either of the animals or other people, outweighs the pleasure of meat eating. Either of these reasons would need further justification. But yet there's another argument put forth mainly by vegans that it is wrong to make any other being a slave. The argument generally goes like this. Animals have certain interests, and these interests include staying alive, reproducing, and avoiding suffering. And you make another being your slave if you subvert any of these interests without permission. Thus, vegans generally believe that not only is it wrong to kill animals for food or sport, it is also wrong to make animals produce food for us, even if they are not dying. For example, we make cows our slaves by forcing them to provide milk. We make bees our slaves by forcing them to provide honey, etc. But of course, like any argument, we can question the unstated assumptions. Why is it wrong to subvert the interests of other beings? Is it because the other beings are sentient? What is it that is intrinsically valuable about interests? After all, as humans, we subvert each other's interests all the time. This is usually what contract negotiations are all about. What of each of our interests we are allowing to go unfulfilled in order that we may fulfill others? But, says the vegan, that subversion is with consent. We do not get the consent of animals, and that's what makes it wrong. The difference here, though, is not that animals don't consent. It is that they can't consent, or at least we can't know if they consent. Furthermore, it's not clear what it would even mean in certain circumstances. Take honey, for example. Bees are born genetically programmed to do a particular job within a hive, and they have ways of communicating with each other in order to do these jobs. Given that whatever nervous system bees do have is concerned primarily with threat detection, I doubt whether bees care whether people take their honey, as beekeepers are generally able to do their jobs without posing a threat to the hive and generally ensure that the hive thrives. So I'm not really sure what it would mean for bees to get consent. But maybe the question about which animals have interests we have to respect also comes down to a question of which animals are sentient. It may be okay to eat honey but not milk because bees are not sentient but cows are. But then the question goes back to one previously addressed. What's so special about being sentient? So what does all this amount to? I know this has been very long, and I don't know what the right answer is, or even if there is a right answer. What I really want is civil discourse, as you said in the recent podcast, and for people to recognize that the things that they believe are obviously true may not be obvious to others at best and may be considered false by others at worst. As such, people need to critically examine their own positions and ideas. We are generally pretty good at criticizing other people, but not so good at inward reflection. You should constantly be asking yourself what assumptions you're making, what kind of logic are you using, whether you're being fair and charitable to others, whether you are getting your facts from reliable sources, where you get your beliefs from, and whether you may be biased in some way that you aren't realizing. If more people did this on a regular basis, maybe we could talk civilly about veganism and vegetarianism, and maybe our government wouldn't be so screwed up. Anyway, that's just my 2 cents, and probably more like 5 since it was so long. But thanks, Jay, and keep up the good work.